2 Sundays, this Sunday and next Sunday, in John 21. I have preached on this text before I became your pastor. Now, we may look at it from a different angle, but still repeat some of the main truths. It's impossible to not repeat it, but just look from a different angle on it, and I will come back to this pretty soon. Just something that I tend to forget at the end of my sermons because I'm already exhausted and I often plan to end it in a certain way. And during my sermon, often I have to decide while I preach what I shall mention and what I shall leave aside because I'm always against the time. I wanted to mention before I start my sermon, if anything, it may not be clear to you. There are things you don't fully grasp or understand, either because of my accent, language, or the content itself. I'm always available at the door, somewhere else as well, even during the week if you like. Call me, approach me, ask questions, and I'm willing to explain. I don't need to do it every time. I don't need to mention this every time from the pulpit, as I cannot recall in school a good professor, after his or her lessons, say, if you don't understand, come after me. Not after every lesson. But once you get to know that person, you know you can. And anytime you need more advice, more explanation, you just go and ask. And I'm here to help in this regard. Today, especially today, after this sermon, and many other occasions, you may feel you want to know a little bit more about Jesus, about God. You may want to know how to improve your relationship with Him. That's why we are here, all elders, mature people, well-equipped people in the congregation. Don't just leave. Stay, come, approach us. We would love to assist. As we will look in John 21, it's not yet the beginning. We will observe later on that there are so many details you cannot cover. And himself, John, says that, look, Christ did so many things that we cannot record in one gospel and even 4 gospels. Because if we were to record everything, there is not enough space in this world to store the books. There is not such a huge library. So, in coming with various questions, be sensible and realize that sometime on purpose, someone who preached the word decides what to share and what not to share from that chapter or from that text. As John plainly says it, there is a purpose in mind. And I praise God for this chapter, that for so many raises the question, why is there? And I'm going to answer briefly next Sunday. Now you can press the button. This Sunday, I'm going to focus on what I believe it is the main and the plain thing in this chapter. Next Sunday, we're going to focusing on several other details that are also important. They are there to support or construct the main and the plain thing in the chapter. I was even thinking to preach 3 sermons, and can be easily 3 or 6 or 7 or 10, why not? It is a very, very, very rich chapter. I have preached out of John 21 for many years, and it's interesting to observe that every single time when I prepare it, although I tend to go with this preconception, well, I've preached it, I have it here, I had the idea, it's hard to notice other things. And as I was actually thinking how to introduce the sermon, once I really had a good one, and I've used it twice in this church, I was tempted to come back to it because it's so good. But then, there must be other things too. And during my holiday last week, I was reflecting on this chapter. Not as a sense of duty, but just in my quiet time with the Lord. And I've noticed so many little details. Wow, I've never noticed them before, which again proves the riches of God's word. I may not focus on many of them today, but next Sunday. Today, my main subject, which I believe is the main and the plain thing that we need to take out of this chapter, is to observe how does Christ restore his broken disciples. Next Sunday, we'll look at various lessons that we may learn out of these chapters, practical lessons. But I think it is important to have a look at how Christ restores his broken disciples. Is anyone here wrestling with your past? Worry about your future? Or fail to enjoy your present? Is anyone here along that experience a sort of a slip away from the journey of faith? Is anyone here ready to admit that we have failures in our life? Many of them. And often struggling to find out how can we put together all these broken pieces of our life. I know that some people get obsessed with this. Some continue to live in the past, while others are very, very reluctant to think of a future. And all this because of this one word that we all hate to experience or to admit: failure. We hate failure. Yet we fail in many ways. Some of the greatest heroes of all time have failed on numerous occasions. And their success came sometimes exactly out of these sort of failures. Just looking back in history, people like Edison were called too stupid to learn anything after he experienced so many times, about 100 times experiments he came with the bulb. Lincoln, he lost numerous elections, and then he turned to be one of the greatest presidents that America had had. About Disney, some people said no real talent. Einstein, he was examined for learning disability and rejected from school. Michael Jordan didn't make it in his high school team in his time. In our case, it could be something simple like fail an exam. For some, failing in marriage, in businesses, failed friendships, failed parenting, moral failure, failed in ministry. And the most painful failure for a Christian is to fail to live out our Christian faith. We don't like failure. It bruises our ego. It leads to what we call brokenness. It angers us. It brings guilt. It brings despair. It brings fear and uncertainty. And as we look to this very chapter, John 21, we see one of the finest disciples of Jesus, Peter, the one who always took the lead, the one to whom Christ said, "You are the rock, you are the foundation." And on your statement in that occasion in Matthew 16, Christ said, "I will build my church." You have a special plan in my purposes or place in my plans. With you, I'm going to do great things. And just a little bit prior to Christ's arrest, death, resurrection, this man stood up and said, if anyone else here may ever fail to follow you, I would never. And yet, just at the day of Christ's arrest, on that Thursday, he denied him 3 times. Can you place yourself in his shoes? Being so brave, making so brave declarations, affirmations, having that sort of an image. Each one of the other disciples looked at him upwards. Now, he had failed, and he had failed badly. Christ has risen. And then he manifested himself several times. Peter saw him twice with his own eyes. He had been to the tomb. He has seen the tomb empty. He's been there, as you heard last Sunday, when Christ appeared again in the upper room and he dealt specifically with Thomas. And he's waiting now. He's seeking Jesus' eyes. Would he look at me? Would he have a word for me too? It seems not to. This is the 3rd Sunday after resurrection. Perfect coincidence for us too, the 3rd Sunday. Christ appeared twice on Sunday, on the first day of the week, and then he disappeared, he evaporates himself, and nothing had happened. And Peter continued to live with this guilt, with his brokenness, and he had taken a decision. Let's look with me in John 21. I choose to read this Sunday from a translation that you are not very familiar, Christian Standard Bible, for a reason. Actually, by the way, it's not very popular yet among British Baptist churches, but this is the only translation owned, produced by Baptists. It's our translation, just so you know. And as I will prove a little bit later, in this particular text, it's a little bit better than NIV, the one that we are very used. And I have it with me too. I brought 3 different Bibles this morning because we want to see several different things. So let's read. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, Zebedee's son, and 2 other of his disciples were together. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to them. We are coming with you, they told him. So we see Peter here as a failure, as a broken person, but still a leader. And we will learn a little bit more about this next Sunday. That a leader is a leader even when we fail. And we need to be very responsible and aware of this because we are still leading people. So he takes a decision. I'm going fishing. We don't know exactly for sure, but we can speculate and we can deduct his reason out of the context. There are here various views. Perhaps he was just bored. What shall you do? Just waiting, or just redeeming the time, or they just had a genuine need for food. So he says, I'm going fishing. The others followed him, 7 of them together. The result of it, even more brokenness. So here we see a broken leader with a broken group of people going to do something that they were so able to do, back to what they used to do the best, fishing. They were all fishermen. And experiencing even more brokenness. While we may not be fully know what's the reason, although I will point it towards the end, we can deduct it. The result of it is so obvious. This brought them to a greater failure. That night they caught nothing. Nothing. So what does Christ do? What does Christ do to restore his broken people, his broken disciples? One thing that we may not like to hear, but this is exactly what he does. He waits for a good, appropriate time. And he often prolongs that time so we can reach the end of ourselves. 3 weeks. He could have done a quick restoration magic trick on the first Sunday. He could have met Peter right at the tomb or in the first appearance, or when he came to deal with Thomas. But this time we can see Jesus waiting for a very appropriate moment. And that moment actually opens up Peter's heart and the other disciples to realize how greater their failure is. Because you see, sometimes while we wait for restoration, we may still have some confidence in us, in our skills, in what we can do, in our resources, in our experience. And we think, well, if Christ doesn't fix that in this area of my life, no worries, I have expertise in these areas. I know what to do. Well, if he does nothing to me as I expect, and he does not redeem me again, or restore my image, or put me back on track in this area, don't worry, I know what to do. I'm very good at fishing. I'm an expert in this area. I'm going fishing. We're coming with you. And the whole night, they toil, and they caught nothing. So Christ has to wait sometimes for us until we truly have to reach the end of ourselves and to convince ourselves that we are not good of anything else without Christ. To teach us a practical lesson of what he already taught us in theory. Look back in John 15. Without me, you can do nothing. Haha, Christ, don't you know? Fishing is not part of that. We'll see. We'll see. And when they experience this, right in that greater brokenness, a greater failure, a greater disappointment, when you realize, well, this area of my life is not fixed, the other area of my life now is a failure too. What's the next thing that Christ does? That's why I've chosen this translation. If you have an IV, you can see the difference. Afterwards, verse 1, John 21. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happens this way. Back to CSB, and maybe you may check with ESV. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way twice in one verse. And this is very close to the original. It says, Christ revealed himself. I think ESV says manifested himself. Which implies that it's not just a coincidence. This is not something, I've noticed Jesus too. This is an intentional manifestation of a living Christ for a purpose. Is when that heaven invades earth for a very specific purpose. And exactly when you do not expect, exactly at the place of your brokenness, exactly where that failure takes place, Christ comes to manifest himself. Actually, John, in this very chapter, uses it 3 times. In verse 14, again says, Jesus revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Manifested himself. He does it purposefully. To point the same truths we've learned on Easter Day. That even when we think we go away from him, he's following us. He comes to manifest himself. Often people may think, if you really want to meet God, come to church. Well, it's wonderful if we come on purpose with this intention. But the reality is when God wants to meet us, he comes where we are. There is no brokenness in your life. There is no failures in your life. There is no point in your life. There is no depth of sins in your life where Christ cannot reach his hand towards to search for you, to restore you. So he comes and reveals himself. We can spend a lot of time, but again, time is my enemy. So what's next? From a distance of 100 yards, he asks a question. A difficult question. It may seem just a natural one, but for them, I'm telling you, that was a tough question. Verse 4, when daybreak came, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Friends, other translation, children, lads. Jesus called to them, you don't have any fish, do you? Now, this is the question, if you are a fisherman, you don't want to hear when you caught nothing. This is really something to be avoided. I'm not aware of anyone really passionate about this. I have been in the past when I was young, and coming home after half a day spent with no fish, I would have avoided to see my mom, put my road somewhere, in the back, and try to find all sorts of excuses. And while you go home, and if people notice you come from fishing, you just don't want to hear this question. Any fish? We can spend a lot of time here. But Christ's question is painful. And there are several painful questions in this chapter that we need to explore. Because you see, when Christ comes to restore, he reveals himself, but then the process of restoration might be painful. It's going to be personal, and it's going to be fruitful or plentiful later on. We will find the right word. But first, it's painful. Because the brokenness itself is painful, he confronts our emptiness. And he demands full honesty. In order to be restored, he demands our full honesty. Guys, have you got anything? I can imagine them look at one another. What shall we say? Well, just say the truth. No. It's not an easy answer, but he demands their honesty. He's not interested in our excuses, explanation. Yes, but no. When he meets us and he looks at our broken hearts, at our broken life, at our broken emotion, broken nerves, broken pieces of our lives, and he looks at that and says, how are you doing? He demands honesty. No excuses. Yes, but the other person, I'm doing this because of that. I ended up here because of... No. In order to be restored, he says, be honest. No, we haven't got nothing. Okay. Looking at Peter's life, jump forward a little bit later to stay in this realm of painfulness. Jesus, after they share breakfast together, we will come back at this scene. From verse 15, approaches Peter face to face directly, personally, to screw this painful screw in his heart one more time. And he, look at verse 15. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said to him. You know that I love you. Feed my lambs, he told him. A second time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, he said to him. You know that I love you. Shepherd my sheep, he told him. He asked him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved that he asked him the third time. Do you notice these things? Peter was grieved. It's painful. Have you got anything? No. A bit of joy. We will come back to that. They caught fish. Now, direct question for Peter. Do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? That's painful, Lord. Why is it painful? Why was Peter grieving? Because Christ asked him the third time. Now, you have heard many sermons on this particular text. I have preached in the past, even at Church Road. And you are aware that there are various views here why Jesus asked him 3 times. Briefly, some believe that Jesus does a kind of a competition here. Do you love me more than these disciples, the other people? Or some believe that Jesus take a bit of revenge. You deny me 3 times. I'm asking you 3 times. Personally and publicly. Because the whole scene is not private. It's together with the other disciples. Some others took the rail of, like this rabbit rail, whatever you want to call, when they look at words, the wording. Twice Jesus Christ uses the word agape, which is the supreme love, unconditional love, the love that only God can really exercise. And Peter answers with phileo, that brotherly, friendly love. And the third time, Jesus uses phileo. Okay, if you say you phileo me, you brotherly love me, then do you brotherly love me? And so you be aware of this sort of difference. I want to read from Philip's paraphrase. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these others? Yes, Lord, he replied. You know that I am your friend. Then feed my lambs, returned Jesus. Then he said for the second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, returned Peter. You know that I am your friend. Then care for my sheep, replied Jesus. Then for the third time, Jesus spoke to him and said, Simon, son of John, are you my friend? Then Peter was deeply hurt because Jesus' third question to him was, are you my friend? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You are omniscient. You know that I'm your friend. It is a good translation, so this is how you should translate that difference between agape and phileo. But is this the key? Is here Jesus lowering the bar of commitment? Okay, Peter, if you cannot answer, you agape me, you love me as I love you, then let me lower the bar of expectation. Do you at least love me as a friend? Are you my friend? Or is something else going on here? As I cannot see Jesus revenging here, asking 3 times because Peter denied 3 times. I cannot see here Jesus creating a kind of a competition, who loves me more. I cannot see Jesus lowering the bar of commitments either. I don't care how many sermons you heard on this. I don't want you to necessarily buy in what I'm saying. I just don't believe this is the case. It's something else going on here. And then we need to look back to the whole context to get it. Do you notice verse 15? When Jesus approaches Simon, the third Sunday after resurrection, this is the first conversation he has with Peter. He uses his old name, Simon, son of John, not Peter. Peter had changed his name. Jesus had changed his name. You are not going to be called Simon, but Peter, a rock. Why now Jesus calls him by his old name? Do you love me more than these? Who are these? Do you love me more than these 6 other disciples? Do you love me more than they love me? Well, what else is there on the shore? What else is there? Go back to the context. Quickly, the time is flying. Fish. When the first painful, penetrating question, have you caught anything? No. In between that and the second and the third and the fourth penetrating question, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Something had happened. Try on the other side. What can we do now? Well, let's try. And they caught so many fish. 153, John records. We'll come back to this next Sunday. Why 153? But when that happened, John whispers, "It's the Lord." Peter hears. He takes his garment. He puts on him. A lesson in this as well. Next Sunday, he was naked. He runs and he finds Jesus on the shore, preparing breakfast for them, having fish already cooked. On what? On charcoal fire. The second and the only time, only 2 mentions of this word charcoal, specific word in Greek, used in the entire New Testament. The first one, Peter denied Jesus around a charcoal fire. The second one, on that charcoal fire, the same word, Christ had prepared breakfast for them. But then, bring some of yours too. Bring some of your fish too. Who is there jumping immediately? I got it. Peter. Look in the text. Peter. Why 153? Just a glimpse. Why would you count when you meet the resurrection Lord and you are still care to spend time to count your fish? Because you love it. You love it so much. And you went back to what you used to love. And the whole story, the whole experience is nothing else than a repetition of what Christ had done when he called Peter and a few other disciples to follow him for the first time. Do you remember? Luke 5. Jesus is preaching on the shore. Massive crowds coming towards him. He needs to go in a deeper water. He needs a boat so he can use it as a pulpit. And there is Peter cleaning his nets after a long night fishing and caught nothing. Says, can I use your boat? Yes, Lord, you can. So he preaches. He finishes his sermon. He turns to them and asks the same question. Any fish? No. Try on the other side. What? Well, we've toiled all night, Lord. All night we got nothing. But because you say at your word, we will. And when they've done it, they got so many fish that the boat were ready to sink almost. When they saw this, Luke 5 records how Peter fell on his knees and said, go away from me, Lord. I am a sinner. Go away. When I see your majesty, when I see your power, when I see what can happen at your word, go away. I'm not worthy of you. I'm broken. Christ takes his hands, lift him up and say, from now on you will fish for men. Follow me. And they left everything. They left the nets, they left the boat, and followed Christ. Would you go back with me in John 21? Verse 3, towards the end, after Simon Peter said to them, we are coming, I'm going fishing. Simon Peter said to them, we are coming with you. The other 6 says. They went out and got into a boat. It's the first time I'm noticing this. The boat. What an article. Not a boat. Why the boat? Might have been the same one? We don't know. We don't know for sure, but it's the boat. Might have been exactly the one that Peter left behind to follow Christ. And now he's coming back to his old business. You see how the whole scene, the whole circumstances, somehow repeats. Christ steps in their own situation and recreate an image, recreate an experience that for Peter made a huge difference. In your brokenness, in my context of life, may I dare to say, look for such experiences. Look for something similar. Look, you may not explain why something keeps repeating in your life. Out of the blue, someone says something. Out of the blue, you have this sense of, I need to go to church, I need to ask a question about, I need to consider this, to check this. Out of the blue, There is a divine intervention in your life. This is how God tries to restore your lives. On that shore, on that boat, with the same type of charcoal, God, Christ, confronts Peter and his emptiness. And he may want to confront our emptiness too. And when he says, throw the other side, try something else. And he is shocked, and they are shocked with the abundance of provision. It's interesting to notice how it's not their adequacy that leads to abundance, to provision, but it's their obedience. It is not our adequacy, I cannot pronounce it very well, ability, that will provide results. Even in regards to next door, even in regards to our new vision, with your own life, it's not our ability, but it's our obedience. Even when it makes no sense, try the other side, try something else, and obey. And when you've done this, abundance, results came. I'll stop here. But there is a lot to say next Sunday. Few more lessons. I just want to close with this. Right now, if Christ comes and knocks at the door of your heart, will he find an open door? Welcome, Christ. Welcome home. Welcome in my life. Change me. Restore me. Put all these pieces together. I don't know how to do it. Or will he find a sign swinging, gone fishing? What will he find? You have the answer.